Hi everybody, TJ Mack of Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here. I want to start today's video by thanking Rob from the channel Baseball Time Traveler for sending me this 1975 Baseball Digest autographed by none other than Steve Garvey. I didn't have a Steve Garvey autograph until now. Not only was the gift incredibly thoughtful, but Rob, he also sent a very nice note that I want to share just a small portion of to show you just how neat his printing is. He writes in small capital letters that are straight and close together. The attention to detail and the precise spacing of the letters is just so impressive. Now, I'm not an FBI profiler, but I imagine Rob is someone who puts a lot of care into everything he does, even seemingly small tasks. Of course, if you've ever watched one of Rob's videos, you know what I'm talking about. The name Baseball Time Traveler is just so fitting. His videos transport us back to significant moments in baseball history. Rob's attention to detail combined with his passion for storytelling, it just creates an experience that brings your card collection to life. Even when he does a simple video, his backdrop is arranged to be warm and inviting. It feels like you're in your grandfather's study, complete with the old sports books neatly stored on the shelves, as you listen to the booming, folksy voice of the great Mel Allen projecting from a 1939 Kenmore radio. The Reds are visiting the Giants, and the slow-footed, hard-hitting catcher Ernie Lombardi is facing the meal ticket, Carl Hubble, and his devastating screwball. Some of you may not know that Mel Allen got his start not just broadcasting Yankee games, but also the Giants. Rob's videos are must-watch. I really appreciate it when he shows his cards and tells personal stories along with his captivating narratives. I'm going to put a link to his channel down below. Now, in today's video, I want to talk about the continuing transition I'm making in my collection. Now, over the past few years, I've been adding more vintage magazines to my collection. It's become a passion that just intertwines nostalgia with the thrill of the hunt. There are just so many different publications and issues available, many of which I've never even seen before. And there's just something very interesting and exciting about it, and I'm just constantly learning, which is something I enjoy. Now, each magazine I acquire isn't just an addition to my collection. It really is a portal to the past. It captures the moments and the stories that shape the sports that I love. Now, unlike my cards, which are predominantly graded, I mostly like my magazines ungraded. I just enjoy the feel of the aged paper, the distinctive smell that carries decades of history, and the vibrant yet time-worn covers that just transport me to a different era. I just get immersed in the stories about the players and the events that define their times. And the advertising is a lot of fun too, because it's a time capsule of fashion and culture and products that are just no longer part of the public consciousness. One of the main reasons I enjoy collecting these vintage treasures is the depth and context they bring to my sports card collection. You see, each magazine, it tells a story. It provides a rich background to the players featured on my cards. Now, today I have a November 1964 sport magazine that complements some of the cards in my collection. I love going through my bin of magazines, reading the articles, and then having the cards to go with them, as you can see here. I have a 1965 Topps Harmon Killebrew and a 1964 Philadelphia Paul Hornung, and they're both, of course, players that are profiled on this cover. Now, I'm going to share with you a very interesting article that I read on Killebrew on the pages of this magazine. Now, the article talks about an incredible hot streak that Killebrew went on in the 1964 season. On May 14th, he was hitting .167 and was benched for 5 games to work on his hitting in practice. Well, whatever he did worked. Over the next 10 weeks, he hit .331 with 32 home runs. He was talked about as a modern-day Babe Ruth, and the papers were comparing his progress to Ruth and Maris's record-breaking seasons. You have to remember that Maris's 61 had an asterisk at the time. Now, the article mentioned Killebrew's humility and how his wife could tell he had a home run because he would come into the house with a sheepish look on his face. The spotlight made him very uncomfortable, but he was a very kind man. It talks about in the article how he visited a kid in New York who had burns on his body 50%, and it happened in an incident lighting a candle at a church. He went into the hospital room and saw the burned boy lying in the bed, and he said to him at some point in the conversation, "Maybe I'll hit you a couple." Then the article said at Yankee Stadium, he ended up hitting a couple home runs that weekend. Not quite Ruth, supposedly telling the child that he was going to hit home runs for him in a game or guaranteeing it, but still pretty interesting that the article talked about that. Something I never would have known without reading this magazine. It also talked about Killebrew stopping batting practice one day to talk to a boy in a wheelchair. He just had something within him that wanted to reach out to people that were less fortunate. And it's not anything that surprises me about his character, but it's very interesting when you read it in the pages of the magazine. Now, it's funny that this magazine spoke mostly to Ruth's home run record and how Killebrew was on this hot streak, and it said that he kept his temperament, unlike Maris, who struggled with the success he was having that season. I think that's a little unfair considering Maris played in New York and he was challenging Ruth's record for much of the season. Herman never really came close to breaking it, but he still finished with 49 home runs. Another article that was very interesting was by retired quarterback Bobby Lane, where he picked the 11 meanest men in football. I was real excited to read this one. I also wanted to see how many players' cards I had in my collection. Well, here's the list. You had middle linebackers Joe Schmidt with the Lions, Sam Huff with the Giants, and Bill George with the Bears. Cornerbacks, Dick Night Train Lane, who played with the Lions, and Jimmy Hill, who was with the Cardinals at that time. And then you had fullbacks, John Henry Johnson with the Steelers, and Jim Taylor, of course, with the Green Bay Packers. Tight end was Mike Ditka with the Bears. Then you had defensive end Gino Marchetti, and then Alex Karras, defensive tackle with the Lions, and then wide receiver Red Mack, who was with the Eagles at that time. Now all the positions aren't represented. He's just picking who he thought were the 11 meanest men. I have 8 of 11 of them in my collection. I don't have a card of Karras yet, surprisingly, as well as Mack or Hill. I'm going to show you a few examples of the players, and I'm just going to talk briefly about them. Here you have 1964 Philadelphia cards of Gino Marchetti, as well as Mike Ditka and John Henry Johnson. Now in the article, Lane had this to say about Marchetti. He called him the meanest player in the game. Lane said that when game planning, they would use X's to mark the opposing players. However, when they played the Colts, Marchetti's name was written out, so they knew where he was at all times with the game plan. Now, Lane was a tough quarterback. I think one of the toughest you're going to find. But he said that when Marchetti was coming in, he would sometimes get rid of the ball too soon. Marchetti was just that intimidating. Now, Gino Marchetti said this: "My greatest enjoyment is hitting the quarterback just before he throws the ball or just as it leaves him." Now, next to him, you have Mike Ditka, and Lane said he had the best stiff arm in the league and was the greatest blocker the Bears ever had. His nickname was the Hammer, which gives you an idea of what players and coaches thought of him. And then next to him is Hall of Fame running back John Henry Johnson. He was one of the best blocking backs ever. In 1955, he fractured Hall of Fame running back Charlie Trippi's skull from a brutal hit. The next game, the Cardinals were plotting their revenge on Johnson, but John Henry Johnson, he showed no fear. He ran by their bench, daring them to do something. Now in these magazines, you're going to see players that you don't really hear much about nowadays that were stars of their day, such as Bobby Joe Conrad, who was a wide receiver with the Cardinals. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about him today because I'm looking to add his first card, which is a 1959 Topps, to my collection. I just haven't acquired one yet. But these are the types of things that I really enjoy, is just reading about these players and then getting copies of their cards to advertise or to display with the magazines. It's just something that is where I'm moving with my collection, and I just gain a lot of enjoyment out of it because I'm learning a lot about the history of the game, not just the Hall of Famers and even the superstars, just a lot of the star players of their time. And it's just something that I find very gratifying. I've mentioned before that I want to eventually put together a combination card and magazine display, and it's going to really be part of the final stages of my collecting journey. I have some ideas about what I want to do, but it comes down to just how big I want it to be. I'm thinking of putting some together that can hold multiple magazines and cards at the same time. I've just built so many interesting themes over the years that I want to display on my walls. That's where I gain my most enjoyment. I'm not much of a binder person. I don't like keeping my cards in boxes unless they're not currently being displayed. I just like to walk around and just take in the history and the beauty of the cards. It's just how I roll as a collector. But until then, I'm just going to continue acquiring magazines and cards that complement one another. And my plan this fall and winter is to chronicle the stories I enjoy in each of my magazines into videos, and I'm just going to do that over time. I'm also going to be curating my magazine collection onto a spreadsheet with the title, the month, the year, and particular stories that I enjoy so I can reference them easily. I just have so many of them that I lose track of what stories are in what magazines. So it's going to be a fun project to do that, and I just look forward to it once the summer settles down with the baseball season and everything. On that note, I'm likely not going to be making a video next week, as it's both the National and I'm going to be traveling to a softball tournament in Ohio, not too far from the National actually. But for those going to the National, I just wish everybody safe travels. To the rest of you, have a great week. We'll talk again soon.